microphone up close. Webcam microphone up close.
At the age of 19 in 1962, she was a...
But I have the files. I read this stuff at the National Archives, and I read these other things. I said to myself, that guy, how can that be possible? The brain, the final slab of choice, I don't know, computers, the internet, professional wrestlers, and not Jesse Ventura style. It doesn't matter whether it's cartoon they rip as long as it's real. It doesn't. It's hard to get real information because seriously, they don't want you to have just read these two sources whenever I try to prove out. It's not. If you expect your government to tell you the truth, you're going to sadly disappoint another one of these things.
Dear Lord, what a dirty, dirty old man.
Really? Can't be serious. Is this really want things to be? Come on. More hooker, eruptions, eruptions, whatever.
Like Dave Powers kind of.
Really?
Allegedly broadcast live from Pima Region 2, within the borders of the formerly united and currently occupied states of America. We bring you the Ochelli Effect.
I damn sure know I'm an original.
We have all these situations. I'd love to know why it takes 50 years, for
that's that.
For a 19-year-old girl to eventually get up to gumption to put these things out.
Well, slightly bombastic and maybe just a touch sarcastic. Always scholastic in one way or another. It's the Ochelli Effect on UCY.TV radio. It's Tuesday night. So what does that mean? That always means the Liberty Beacon on the Ochelli Effect. Now, I had a little discussion with Roger Landry, and he won't be joining us on the call. Instead, we're going to actually spend 2 hours with somebody else. And tell you the truth, we're going to explore where this gentleman is at, where he's coming from, and everything else together. Because, of course, never having exactly enough time to get myself totally involved in everything there is to be involved in, the only thing that I know for sure is that since this gentleman is part of the Liberty Beacon, I know that I have an interesting individual at the very least. Have never had a problem with anybody who's come on from the Liberty Beacon, I got to tell you, and this show on Tuesdays I do dedicate to them in partnership with Mr. Landry, and as we discussed last week, it's just over 2 years ago that the Liberty Beacon Project was born on exactly the birthday of its founder, Mr. Landry. But more with Mr. Landry next week. However, Randy, you're with me, aren't you?
I'm here.
Excellent. So, I got that this time, I usually try and research my guests just a little bit. I try and find out where they're coming from. I didn't do that with you. You know what I did instead? I asked a couple of people's opinions.
That's dangerous.
Yeah, I know it is, because, man, oh man, if you would have asked opinions about me, you might have found enough to make sure that you would find yourself too sick to appear tonight. I'll tell you, but it's okay. It's okay. We're all friends here. I know you don't know me, and I don't really know you, so you know what I want to do for my listeners is to try and get sort of a feel, like sort of a summary background, your evolution into becoming, although I got to tell you, one of the common themes among anybody that I did ask about you was that you're an extremely awake and aware individual. So I'd like to know about that evolution, how it is you came to that point. How about that? We start there.
Okay, great. That sounds good, Charles. And thanks for having me on tonight to represent the Liberty Beacon Project. Obviously, you're not going to get the rants from me that you get from Roger, and that could be a good thing or a bad thing. I'm not sure. My evolution. Well, how far do you want to go?
Well, it's all got to do with your comfort level, man.
Okay.
I don't want to push you to go anywhere strange. I just figured we'd give a nice setup.
Well,
yeah, I can already tell your demeanor is not quite like Roger's, but then again, I love Roger's rants, man.
I do too.
They are awesome.
Yeah. Well, Strange is kind of my middle name. I don't know if you know this. I'm the host of a radio program called Off Planet Radio. And Off Planet Radio is about a 5-year-old project that I began. Previously, I had been doing web streaming shortwave radio under the aegis of a network out in Oregon, where I was basically doing a lot of spiritual type stuff. And I started to do some spiritual shifting around 2009, moving out of what was left of my religion and moving into authentic spirituality. And part of that journey had to do with investigating elements of the paranormal, what was going on with the UFO thing, which were things that I had researched all my life.
Okay, well, you dropped out really quick there. We got as far as the UFO thing and how you were looking at it in relation to spirituality, etc. I hope you're still with me. You may have hit your mute button. Anyway, I do find this a fascinating subject, and lately I have been diverging more into the spiritual aspects of one's evolution, of one's sort of psychosocial connection to the rest of the population, and I think it's a very valid point to get into. I have said on previous shows that I'm not very much with the alien agenda, but then again, one of my guilty pleasures is I still like to listen to guys like Clyde Lewis and all that, so what can you say?
Well, let me ask you a question.
Sure.
You said the alien agenda. What does that mean to you, Charles?
Well, what it has meant to me over the years has been a whole lot of, and I hate to do this because the mainstream loves to do this. There's a kooky element to anything.
Yes.
And there is a nonsensical, non sequitur element, sometimes done on purpose, in order to integrate it into those of us who, to sort of classify all of us together that are questioning the official stories about a lot of things. Quite often, I was known as a JFK researcher, right?
I know that.
And, thank you. But the thing is that when I did that, quite often, even when I was invited to participate in discussions, the ad hominem attacks were almost always followed by, well, you must believe that aliens rule the planet and that Area 51 is actually the new capital of the world. And I would sit there and shake my head and say, what does that have to do with the forensic studies that I've engaged in as an amateur investigator here? What does that have to do with the documents that I have in front of me that are from your government showing that they lied to you about their own evidence? What does that have to do with that? And my opinion, therefore, this is a non sequitur. What are you doing? But people support it,
Well, non sequitur is basically how they discredit intelligent researchers. Because researching is discouraged in the mainstream media. It's all pre-digested, pre-fed, and history itself has been rewritten on a continual basis, as you know as a JFK researcher. Absolutely. How long it has taken to get the truth out, how long it took to see the Zapruder film, how long it took to break through a lot of the crap from the official story, to debunk the single bullet theory that Orlin Spector put out. And it's much the same way with what we'll just call the UFO issue. Because oddly enough, it is only probably about 6 clicks away from JFK into this subject at different points, because clearly there was something going on in the government after 1947 that was a complete redo of constitutional Republican form of government in the United States. The National Security Act completely changed the form of government that we had after 1947.
Absolutely.
And so you have to ask yourself historically what was going on in that period of time. And obviously a lot was going on. It's post-World War II era. We're entering into the Cold War. We are entering the meme of fear of the Russians, fear of the Chinese, fear of communism, and it's a lockdown in America.
Well, and at the same time, studying psychological programming, I mean, they had leaps and bounds. They had moved forward with the introduction of individuals from other parts of the world. I mean, I don't care if you believe in the paperclip story or not; it's real. The fact is that we got advances not only in technology but in psychiatry. from the Third Reich in this country, and that stuff was integrated into a great many things. During that very same time period, you saw Project Artichoke, MK Ultra, and this was all about crowd control, ladies and gentlemen. I mean, this is real stuff. This isn't paranoid conspiracy theory. And, I always feel obligated to say that, even though their own documents can prove some of it. Of course, Alan Dulles was very, very smart and destroyed the majority of the real documents that would have led us into a whole lot of interesting areas like MK Delta, et cetera, et cetera. But they somehow forgot to destroy the financial records, which allowed us to recreate a bunch of it. Thank you very much, Mr. Dulles. He always said when he was part of the Warren Commission, the most active Warren Commission member in executive sessions, by the way, ladies and gentlemen, he always said Americans don't read, so it doesn't matter anyway, but unfortunately some of us do. So, yeah, this is part of that climate, right? So, this is really where I'm stuck on history, too, because we have a change in the posture regarding warfare on a global scale. We have the real strengthening, the stronghold of the centralized banking system, really. I mean, I know it started in 1913, this particular machination that has become, the Federal Reserve. But if you think about it, it took a little while before all of that agenda to really take hold. And this changed a great many things. And psychologically, the useful boogeyman at that time, during those changes, like you were saying, was communism instead of terrorism. And they were just the same type of evil. They wanted to rule the world, and we're going to be the good guys. We're going to be the good guys. And, but then when you look at the redacted history, you discover different things, don't you?
Well, exactly. And, unfortunately, as you were talking about these secret projects, they didn't manage to destroy all the human evidence. And that was a lot of what I have dug into over the last 5 years. I've actually been interviewing people that came out of different CIA black projects, including MK Ultra. I've sat down and met these people. I've interviewed them. I've spent extensive amounts of time researching what I could about the projects themselves and what occurred in these projects in terms of mind control at a level that we don't want. We basically did exactly what you said, Charles. We brought the Nazi technology, the Nazi psychiatry, and all the methodology into the United States, and that was really the nexus of this mind control project that began under Artichoke and several other names that have been cloaked as well. But it's, the thing about it is, we have been on an arc for a very long period of time, and I don't know where all of this begins. It looks like in the history of the United States, from 1789 to maybe the early 1820s, it looks like that was the golden age of America in terms of actually being a fully realized republic, and even that was hopelessly flawed. But by the time we get past the War of 1812 and then into the Civil War period, we're heading towards where we are today. So it's been a very slow boil for the frog of America.
Oh, absolutely. And I've often said and been criticized for saying that, although, people credit Abraham Lincoln with having, signed the Emancipation Proclamation and having freed the slaves, trip on my tongue number one, folks. I always say there's got to be at least 3 during a broadcast for me, so be aware of that, Randy. I will get tongue-tied. But I always say that post the time of Lincoln's presidency, post the Civil War, slavery was not abolished; it was actually expanded, and now what we have is free-range slavery.
Oh, the 14th Amendment.
Yes, sir.
And I know Lincoln's venerated, and to me, he's a very mixed historical figure. But at the end of the day, if you look back in the historical record of what was going on leading up to the Civil War, those states had a right to secede. They were independent states according to the way the country was originally constituted. And Lincoln basically had to shred the Constitution at that point in order to do what he claimed was his major goal in the war, which was to, quote, preserve the Union.
This is correct. And, often this provokes, and this is a funny thing, because people have been conditioned to automatically respond to that type of argument that well, obviously you support the South, you support slavery, you support, you're a racist, this and that. This is not what it's about, actually, and the truth is that if you want to say that the Civil War was about slavery, it was more about the industrialization aspect and the and the way that we were conducting business. Yes, it had that particular let's just say moral cloak about it, but the truth is there was a whole lot more going on, and you got to examine the totality of the situation. Plus, name me another time where more Americans were killed on American soil. You can't. So however you want to look at it, preserving the Union, abolishing slavery, this is not the full breadth of the issue. And it's one of those things that you get that kind of backlash, don't you?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's not seventh grade civics class anymore, and the history we were fed in school was obviously the state-authorized version. And you have to go a little deeper into this. The truth of the matter is that, as nearly as I can tell, the Civil War itself was foreign instigated. It was clearly there were clearly a number of parties who had an interest in this. There was high Jesuit activity that was going on in the country. Britain itself had a steep interest in maintaining the agrarian lifestyle of the South because they were the benefactors because of the cotton that they were trading at the time, which continued through the war. And you had a split in the economy at that point because Lincoln did the greenback dollar, and the South then had to issue currency, but they basically had to issue what was a fiat currency, and then they balanced their books with the sale of their cotton to Great Britain. So Great Britain, by the back door, was basically financing the South through the Civil War.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you think that that's not true, please go look. There's tons of evidence for it that there were beneficiaries, and actually a lot of the banking interests benefited quite a bit from all of the chaos that was created financially in this entire country during the Civil War. And again, like I said before, sometimes Lincoln is venerated very highly as one of these, progressive thinkers, as one of these great men who did great things. But, there was more than one reason they tried to assassinate him on more than one occasion. And you know what's funny about that? Just really quickly, I always love to be a smart ass and bring this one up. But, generally when you ask, your average sleepwalker, well, what was it that killed Abraham Lincoln? Was that a conspiracy or was that one man? They would tell you it was one man. It was John Wilkes Booth. And, there is a case on record where one of our American presidents was actually killed as a result of a conspiracy. I'm not saying that I agree with the conviction of all parties, but the thing is that are you aware that there are still documents that the United States government will not release regarding the Lincoln assassination? Okay? I'm not kidding you. Go ahead and try and get them from the National Archives if you like. You'll get a pink slip. Well, actually, I don't know if they do that anymore. It might be all computerized. Last time I went, it was still a lot of paper. You'd get a pink slip, which would tell you that for reasons of national security, you weren't allowed to have that particular document, even if you could give them the right RIF number. So,
oh wow,
yeah, just so everybody knows, because it's like, oh, shut up about JFK. It was a long time ago, and we know, and it's all come out. But they have not told you the truth about the Lincoln assassination yet, ladies and gentlemen. I promise you that.
No, they never will. That's why people like you who have done the wet work for decades on this. I don't claim to be a JFK researcher. I've researched it, but more than anything else, I've tried to talk to people who did the extensive research on it. And it is, I think for us in this generation, that's the mother lode of conspiracy right there. And I'll use that term. That's one of the tar balls that they want to throw at you. They want to say, well, you're a conspiracy theorist. You're a tinfoil hat wearer. And it's kind of like, no, what that is that's the mockery that comes from the mainstream hive that wants you to believe the traditional view of history and never look at anything and examine and research it for yourself. And it's like Roger Landry always says, do your research, people. Well, that's what you have to do.
Exactly. And you know what? Since you brought up tinfoil hats, this is obligatory on my show. Every time somebody mentions the tinfoil hat, I have to do this. I would like to formally apologize to any individual that I have ever referred to as wearing a tinfoil hat previous to my own awareness, because you were correct. The CIA was attempting to beam things into your brain, and I was very, very wrong to mock you. Thank you very much. Okay, so I have to say that I know it sounds like a joke, but the more we learn about directed energy weapons, and I'm fascinated that you've spent time trying to interview people that have been involved in this kind of stuff, because we've seen dribs and drabs of this stuff come out about say psychic driving, the use of hypnosis. Not to bring up another, this is one of those things that gets wrapped into a lot of different situations. I mean, everything from Jonestown, the Jonestown massacre to, various other what they call cult activities, all the way to the Bobby Kennedy assassination in '68. The Manchurian candidate narratives, which they remade that with Denzel Washington not too long ago. But there's an older movie like that too, and a book. What's that?
With Frank Sinatra.
Yes, sir, sure was. And don't believe us? Go look it up. You might know the Denzel version. I hear it's not bad, but I never watched it myself.
No, it's actually a very. There's a story to that movie. Frank Sinatra was actually very close friends with the Kennedys.
Yes, he was.
And this movie was actually, the original book was actually written, and the script was written prior to the Kennedy assassination. And in fact, I think this movie was probably filmed between 62 and 63. The movie was actually held out of release after the JFK assassination because, frankly, Frank Sinatra was completely freaked out by the whole thing.
Well, another interesting story, because there's an odd nexus with Hollywood and the Kennedy family anyway. Joe Kennedy Sr. was actually a movie producer for a while. I mean, he produced, schlock mostly, but he was quite integrated with the Hollywood community. And even John, far beyond the whole Marilyn Monroe thing, which has been blown way out of proportion, ladies and gentlemen. But moving forward, there was also the incidents with the movie 7 Days in May, which was made out of a book that Kennedy actually encouraged it and allowed them to film around the White House and everything else, which was kind of unprecedented at the time. And the story, for those of you who don't know, depicts essentially a military coup against the President of the United States. And if you don't think the military-industrial complex had a serious hand in those shots in Dallas, please, again, do read something, for God's sake.
That's actually creepy. I didn't know that about that movie, but that's like creepy prophetic stuff there.
Yeah, he actually encouraged and worked with the producers of that film to, like I said before, he vacated part of the White House so that they could film there. So you actually have authentic on-location filming. And it was directly one of those things that, that Kennedy had been involved in. And, you want to talk prophetic, of course, if you read the articles from Arthur Kroc, who was actually a rather well-noted columnist at the time, a White House source who was unnamed very, very strongly just previous to the assassination was coming out and saying that essentially that the major threat to the presidency would be a coup that would probably be portrayed by the CIA. Okay, and that came out months before the assassination. That close White House source, I've heard many a rumor about where it came from, but nobody's ever quite pinned it down. It was definitely somebody in Kennedy's inner circle, because he was actually battling the intelligence agency. Probably the last president to have any sort of success at that.
He had thoroughly planned to take down the CIA, I believe, didn't he, Charles? Wasn't he planning on? I mean, that was the whole deal with. He basically formed the Defense Intelligence Agency as kind of a counter intelligence agency to the CIA in 1960, 61.
Right, after the Bad Pigs debacle, essentially,
yeah.
he was looking to create an agency which could take away the power that the CIA had garnered all on its own. And it's interesting that today we still see this stuff. And what's funny about the CIA, and I want to get back to this MK Ultra discussion, because I'm telling you, man, this is one of those things where I've never been able to get my hands on too many people that I found credible anyway, because there are people that I don't find credible that have made these claims about having been victimized by stuff, and I'm sure you've encountered people that are not credible. But to actually get legitimate individuals who I know are describing something that's real is very, very hard, and it's also very difficult because of the lack of documentation, so on and so on. But what is interesting to me about the whole battle with the CIA at that point, and all of these areas, is that the agency was never meant to practice on American soil. As a matter of fact, in its own charter, it says that it is not to be operational within the confines or the borders of the United States. This is an absolute fact. Even according to their own charter, they're not supposed to be operational here. But we find out many, many times over that they blatantly set up operations bases, and these are the things that we know about. The black ops and some of these much deeper, darker issues are things that have been very well shrouded in secrecy and confusion for many, many years, despite the congressional hearings, in the 70s, and this ongoing farce of the intelligence, Feinstein, you know what I'm talking about here, the current congressional intelligence committee and all that. This is a joke at this point. Even if you go back to and I'm telling you, there used to actually be documentation that would drop out of some of these committees in the 70s and even in the 80s a little bit. But post-Iran-Contra, I don't think we ever heard another legitimate peep out of people that were going to drop this kind of stuff on us. But that's yet another issue, isn't it?
It certainly is, yeah.
But back to the MK Ultra thing, people laugh about this because they say, of course, this is just a paranoid delusion. And, in some cases it is. There are people that have paranoid delusions. I don't deny that. But if you really delve into the reality of what has actually been perpetrated by this government on its own people for the purposes of experimentation, forgetting about the psychological warfare that's gone on, I mean, there's been plenty of examples of, please, Tuskegee, the admitted use of prisoners in other countries to test, exactly how long it takes venereal diseases to kill you. This stuff is documented. And documented even by the perpetrators at this point. But when we get into this kind of area, it always goes a little askew, and this is, again, where they try and, put that tinfoil hat on you. They try and Photoshop it on you. But, I'm listening to your consideration of history. I'm listening to your consideration of the world around us. And, you don't sound like a kook, Randy, so for my listeners, talk to me about some of this stuff that you have looked into, because this is really fascinating.
Well, MK Ultra, what you call MK Ultra, is actually an umbrella for a lot of different projects that ran from the 1950s forward, as best we can document it. A lot of it is documented, but any documents you attempt to get from the government now will be awash in black lines and whiteout, because all the details have been, obviously obscured. MK Ultra is the most public because it actually was brought out in congressional hearings, and there was documentation presented. But going back to the 1950s, there were a series of ongoing, in-the-background discussions about how America was going to position itself in a Cold War world. And it was known at that time that the Russians, through their German contacts inside the Russian government, were working on what were basically super soldier programs. And the United States, parallel to that, was also through psychological warfare operations and various scientific inquiries, working in the background to begin to develop strategic advantage using even psychic warfare and things like that. These were all things that had obviously come out of Nazi Germany. Hitler was extremely interested in this kind of stuff. One of the encounters early on that I had when I began investigating MK Ultra is a fairly well-known MK Ultra disclosure named Duncan O'Finian. And I've interviewed Duncan probably 20 hours, some of which is public, some of which is not at this time. And I was skeptical. I was very skeptical about, anybody coming forward and saying the things that Duncan said. But he had earlier been interviewed on conspiracy theory with the former governor, Jesse Ventura. And Project Camelot as well had done several interviews with Duncan, one of which he was joined by his former field commander and trainer, David Corso, who I later also got to know as well. And what I began to learn was that this was a project that was operating completely parallel and outside of the accountability at times of the main government. There was no accountability to military or even upper management. Basically, these projects were hybrid projects that were sometimes running 2 and 3 at a time. And the project that basically spearheaded this, which was responsible for scoping out recruitees, because these were children, was a project called Project Talent. And Project Talent...
I actually know about this. This was the idea of actually trying to raise up the super soldier. In other words, they were having too much trouble trying to augment adult subjects. So the idea was to try and actually raise them, right?
Right. The idea was basically to find recruits who were children, generally 5 to 9 years old, and recruit these children, put them into programs, develop their skills, and their skills included... what's amazing about this is how well profiled most of these subjects are. This is the early 1960s that I'm focusing on in my research, and theoretically we are not running genetic databases at this point, but somehow or another this government, through military files and census files that had been kept, I guess, since World War II, began to profile children containing certain genetic traits, blood types, and family lines. Mm-hmm. And they were looking for some very specific things. Largely, one of the things that they were looking for was psychic skills. They were looking to train people as psychic spies, and Project Talent began to recruit children. In Duncan O'Finion's case, I think he was taken at 9 years old. And basically, he was taken into a back room of somewhere that his mother took him. They tested him, and they basically removed him from the custody of his parents and took him off to a safe house where they then began to screen him and test him and do some preliminary training.
Now, see what's interesting about this, and you're talking about post-World War II, but these things were first suggested in the early 20th century, by American, and I do mean American eugenics societies, who were looking to try and strengthen bloodlines and create certain classes of people. Everybody who thinks that the idea of eugenics, the idea of creating master race or soldier races or et cetera, trying to breed people to create certain classes of individuals is a Nazi idea exclusively. You're dead wrong. Really, I can only go as far back as the American eugenics movement. So good luck to you on that one. But, but this is, of course, the culmination of all this stuff. They had studied this, discussed it, and had these societies and think tanks for a long time. And then when they, of course, got the greater scientific work that was being done in Germany and pulled that back here, I mean, a lot of scientists, not just Werner von Braun and his rockets, but like I said before, psychiatrists and other doctors, when they got them back here, they integrated that into their schematic, let's just say, for what they were going to do. And this is what happened. And children were being tested and are still being evaluated as of, at the very least, 20, 30 years after what you're talking about here. We can still find traces of this stuff going on now, and profiling and a lot of this psychological conditioning. that is being done later on. I mean, I've heard many a horror story, not only, because people say, well, parents wouldn't voluntarily give up their children, et cetera, et cetera. Well, here's the thing. If you have a child who winds up being a bit of a juvenile delinquent or something like this, and they get sent somewhere, and then they're killed while in custody, or something else happens, and your child simply disappears, child abduction has a whole lot more than one reason. I mean, we learned that with the Franklin scandal, and et cetera, et cetera. But this is something that has really serious dark implications, because it's backed by the people that are supposed to be backed by our government. And I want you to keep going, but I wanted to take a break there just to say that, because, a lot of people say, well, everything you think in the world happened post-World War II. No, there was plenty of groundwork that was laid for this stuff in advance, and if you don't believe me, look it up for yourselves. This is easily obtainable public knowledge.
Well, you can go back to the late 19th century. I mean, Friedrich Nietzsche was writing about this in his books, Übermensch, which was written in the late 1800s. Thus Spake Zarathustra was also a book that had a lot of referential material. This ideal has been implanted into the consciousness of humanity all of the 20th century and now going into the 21st century, Charles.
Yes, absolutely.
These projects, and I'm not going to tell a lot of Duncan's story, because, I would really encourage you, and I can make this arrangements for you if you're interested, for you to sometime have Duncan on, because he can tell a story much better than I tell it, although he's given me permission to speak for him on in public ways about his background. But what really happened was that Duncan was taken into a laboratory. He was wired up to an electrical system, and at some point in time, they terrorized him psychologically to the point where he was breaking down. And at one point, these scientists, one of whom was a German-speaking woman scientist, looked at Duncan as he was about to crack under psychological pressure, and Duncan said, just go ahead and kill me. And they hit a switch and electrically split Duncan's personality. Not once, but into 3 to 5 separate personalities that then were trained and used in operations beginning when Duncan was still a child in Southeast Asia in the early 70s. I think he was 12 years old when he was in Southeast Asia on the field with a group of psychic soldiers that they used to take out some Vietnamese troops.
And the subdividing of the personality is a natural occurrence in some cases, usually because the individual has gone under such amounts of stress that they have literally had to separate themselves into pieces in order to cope with. It's like a really severe coping mechanism.
Right.
And this is, again, standard psychology here, but the thing is, in order to elicit that kind of response and to be able to call it a controlled split, I mean, they literally had to drag this kid through hell.
Yes, and that was the whole point. The whole point was clearly they understood what they were doing, because there are acceptable limits past which you cannot go, where you will just melt the person down and they'll be useless, or you will kill the subject. And in fact, that happened a lot. That's part of the legacy if you go out and do the research on the Montauk Project and the number of children that died as a result of what was going on out on the end of Long Island at Montauk.
Right. A lot of them were found to be burnt out. Sometimes they just kind of dumped them out there somewhere and let what happened to them happen to them. This is what was discovered through that. And they absolutely burned out the life out of some of these kids and just discarded them. This is what can, you sort of have to assemble it later on, because again, it's not like people that do these kind of things come out usually and say, yeah, I did it. Although occasionally we do hear from some of these psychologists and things that were proud to have participated in different projects, mind control projects, and every once in a while they do make a public statement, usually just before they pass away.
Right.
But this is and tell me, in your own mind, I mean, what could be more evil than to take and twist children around to try and make them serve your own purposes, and then well, listen, if you twist them too far and they snap and shatter, well, that's just acceptable because after all, you're going to kill some of your lab rats, So I don't know, but. And people, like I said before, a lot of people do think this is just paranoid fantasy, and a guy like Duncan that you're talking about here would be just somebody who has a mental condition. Well, except that he does have a mental condition, probably. But as for how he got that way, that in there is the quandary we find ourselves in. Because what is it that made you believe him? Because obviously you're a discerning kind of guy, and you wouldn't just take a wild-eyed story and just run with it, right? I mean, there had to be certain aspects to this that made him very believable. I'm just curious.
Well, clearly he had already been documented. He had been on Jesse Ventura's TV show, and I had also watched the Project Camelot interviews that he had done. And this was several years after he had interviewed for Project Camelot. He had disappeared, and I took a flyer. I went to his website, and I thought, well, nothing ventured, nothing gained. I shot Duncan an email, and I heard back from him. And we began emailing back and forth, and then eventually we connected on the phone. And I did the first interview, and here's the thing. One of the things that we always have to trust is our gut. And we do our research, of course, and I watch for stories. When I'm interviewing people, whether they are paranormal practitioners, UFO abductees, people who have seen strange things, or people who have come out of projects, I want to hear the story more than once. I will go through details repeatedly. And in Duncan's case, he was documented well enough that I could do that. But Duncan and I hit a point in the first interview where something unexpected happened. He began to tell a story, and Duncan broke down in the middle of that interview. It's actually preserved on my website on the first interview I did with Duncan. We literally had to stop. Both of us were in tears because he hit an emotional point. It was like a jolt came through my headset as I was recording him. And I have to tell you, at that point, I believed the guy. He has since demonstrated who he is in a number of ways in terms of his abilities and in terms of the things that happened to him. And a lot of what I've learned from him has been corroborated by other witnesses, one of whom was, of course, David Corso, who was an Army sergeant who trained Duncan and worked with Duncan when Duncan was a boy. Dave came out and basically verified Duncan's story about what happened in Southeast Asia in 1970. I'm going to say it was like 1974, towards the end of the war. This is in Cambodia. Dave passed away earlier this year, but he left behind hours and hours of audios and video where he and Duncan talked about what happened over the years that they worked together. And I got to sit in on private sessions with them where a lot of things were talked about and discussed. Some of that's been released and some of it is still not released, which is, hopefully at some point we're gonna make all this material available.
Well, I'm not going to say why, but I'll tell you this: that if Corso actually verified what he was talking about, that would have been the end of it for me right there, because it's difficult to explain about Corso.
Okay,
it's difficult to explain about him, but he had his fingers in a lot of things. Let's just say,
of course. And I split publicly with Corso in 2012 because of that.
Yeah, but here's the thing, whenever you deal with any of these people, and I'm going to say this because I've spent some time trying to deal with these guys, whenever you deal with any of these guys who are really part of the creature of the real intelligence community, there is a high degree of difficulty with knowing when you're being misled and everything else. But I'm going to say that if you can back yourself with a guy like that, then that means you were definitely involved in something serious. It's strange. There's only a handful of people that I've ever really encountered where I would say that they were absolutely one of the most verifiable parts of that system that I've encountered, face to face. There's a lot of people out there that make claims. There really are.
Yes.
And that's why I wanted to go over this. I mean, and I see that you're saying that, look, you got to trust your gut, but you got to refine your gut too, because some people play on sympathies and get you to not necessarily believe what they're saying, but to lean in their direction so that it's a little more likely. And sometimes they spin yarns, sometimes intentionally, sometimes unintentionally. Like, see, another problem with the MK Ultra victims, and I will call them the victims of it, is that you don't know necessarily if they're relating a product of the damage done to them, or if they're relating a reality. And this is something that I had difficulty with, and why I never did take the time to do what you did. So I applaud you that you actually were able to discern and to sort your way through this. Because, I mean, it's been one of those things that I've put aside a little bit because it's just so difficult to sift through it. And spending all that time, of course, on the assassination, I wound up encountering some of these people as well, because there's plenty of evidence for all kinds of things going on, psychological warfare-wise, regarding the assassination, the cover-up, news media, you name it. So you wind up encountering this stuff through there, and really it was one of those subjects that, although I started studying mind control and crowd control, and even the evolution, let's just say, of cult groupthink, in modern history, I did start studying that. It was very difficult for me to try and deal with people personally, because it was one of those things that was so inconsistent. Like, there was no two victims of this alike, really, even if they've been through the same process, because every human being reacts to stressors differently, right?
Yeah, look, this is not ever going to be documented to anybody's contentment, I think. Go back earlier in history to a book that was written late, 1979, by Walter Boert, Operation Mind Control, which is a work that came out of... Walter Boert was the publisher of the East Village Other. It was literally the first major urban underground newspaper in the 1960s. And Boert, as a result of his publishing activities in New York City with East Village Other, was in constant contact with guys coming back from Vietnam. And the book Operation Mind Control actually grew out of conversations that were happening with these guys coming back from Vietnam, who were basically coming to Walter Boert and saying, look, something happened to me over there. This is what happened. And it became almost like a template for people who were involved in any kind of traumatic mind control operation. It included split personalities, confusion, inability to recall details, extensive amounts of missing time where entire weeks or even months of somebody's life would just be missing. And there would be no official documentation for such as well. And so, obviously earlier than that, you had the Manchurian Candidate, which came out that probably came out in even the late 50s or early 60s. So very early on, this type of operation was already being discussed and conceived. And how prescient that you would have the Manchurian Candidate, and then down the road, in the period of a few years, you would have the assassination of Robert F. Kennedy by Sirhan Sirhan, who would later confess he had no recall at all of the events that occurred. Now, who's going to believe him? or the Manson family murders that occurred out in Laurel Canyon, which also appear to have the flavor of a mind control operation beyond Manson and his charismatic cult personality.
Well, right. That's the storyline that was sold to people, and I got to tell you that it's my personal opinion that, and believe me, I'm planning on doing a show on this exact topic, that there may have been more of a frame-up of Charlie Manson than you think. Okay, there may have been greater controllers at work there, even for that, because after all, fear-based trauma programming is effective. And think about the amount of terror, the cult-like status that the man reached after the murders. Forget about what he had there, at Spawn Ranch and all this. I mean, he is a very useful sort of demon, isn't he?
Yeah. Yeah.
And, of course, there are segments of society which have, venerated him again as one of these, modern-day prophets and all that. You'll have that kind of thing. But weird that he becomes one of these figures. And, again, I say question everything. This is one of those things that needs to be looked at again as well, because this was pretty much the death knell for a lot of the, a lot of the more positive elements,
the counterculture.
In the counterculture. Look, now we have the hippie murders, so the people that are part of the counterculture, they are, pretty well a problem for you, because they can turn violent, and the drug fueled, and the this and the that and the third thing. And meanwhile, our own government definitely enjoyed the use of LSD on its own people, and did plenty of experiments on that. And we've been able to find out about some of that, haven't we?
Oh yeah, definitely. The LSD was present almost from the beginning. I mean, it was actually coming out of even England at the time. The Beatles were heavily involved with this, and of course, the Beatles triangulate into Manson as well in a weird kind of way. But the LSD thing was there early on. I mean, what was it? My sense of history fades. Okay, 65, 66. The Beatles recorded a song called Dr. Robert, which John Lennon said was about the dentist that was furnishing him with LSD. And of course, we have tales now coming about intelligence agents that were literally just handing LSD out, bailing it over the walls of universities to get it into distribution. You had Owsley, who was running the electric Kool-Aid acid test, where they were passing out hits of acid at rock concerts like Monterey Pop and the early rock concerts before Woodstock. So, LSD was basically introduced into the culture as a means to do a mind control project on a broader scale with the public, with our kids, with kids who are in college.
Well, right, and again, though, people like to say, well, it's just wild-eyed conspiracy theory because people just enjoy getting high, and that's all there is to it, and that may be, true to some degree, but it would much behoove them more to look at stuff like mushrooms if they were looking to do that. The actual introduction of this very easy, cheap, very simple to transport, and relatively easy to distribute version of a psychedelic, chemical. Again, we see that pattern later because all of a sudden we have a crack epidemic, which again is tied to intelligence agencies over and over again. It seems as though the intelligence agencies, and if you look at stuff like Operation Phoenix and things like that, and Doug Valentine, who has been a guest on this show, discussing stuff like from his books, Strength of the Wolf, Strength of the Pack, stuff like that, you find that in fact the war on drugs is even more of a fairy tale than the war on terror. Our own agencies, our own people are involved in this constantly, and they are so deeply intermingled with one another that you can't even begin to separate them. Half the time the biggest drug lords in countries are actually very closely tied to our intelligence assets. And, again, we witness it with the war on terror. Well, the heroin production seemed to skyrocket again out of Afghanistan after...
Exactly.
After we did what? Well, we backed the so-called Northern Alliance, and the evil Taliban was actually, quashing the entire distribution of poppies and all that.
The fields and basically running, shutting down all the distribution operation of the poppy fields. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's just one of those things that just, history doesn't necessarily repeat itself, but it definitely rhymes, right?
Good one.
And it's the MO. It's the MO of the intelligence agencies. They are all about mind control and the drugs and the disinformation and the false narratives that are fed to us via our mainstream history. All of these things are all intertwined. They're all, part of the same mechanism, and it's all about control, isn't it?
Yeah, that's what it's about. It's about control, and it's about constantly pushing the boundaries to see how they can move us towards whatever their agendas are at the time.
And that's why I said about the children, look, they'll just twist them until some of them break, and okay, now we know where the limit is. This is what they do, and this is why this stuff is beta tested on communities that the general populace doesn't really care about. That's why the inner city communities end up getting, absolutely ravaged by the waves of drugs and things first. Because look, suburban America is not going to get into an uprising because people in inner cities are killing each other for bags of powder. It's just that simple. But the addictive nature of this stuff and the fact that there's all of these very, very interesting sort of chemical innovations that occur in the drug culture, during a time when we didn't have too much drug interaction with, other really fruitful partners in the world because, the South American drug trade had been, pretty much over-spotlighted and was way too much in the sunlight after Iran-Contra.
Yeah.
Notice we had the influx of designer drugs. Oh, look, all of a sudden we're all becoming chemists. And we now know how to make things out of household goods. And, of course, you get the methamphetamine and all that other stuff, which is very cheap and easy to make from all of your wonderful products at the great pharmaceutical industrial complex. You can just combine a couple of our cheap over-the-counter pieces of crap, and you can make something really good for yourselves, people.
Yeah, it became as simple as going out and buying some basic chemicals and being able to buy enough ephedrine at the drugstore, and you could mash out some crank real fast, meth.
Yeah, exactly. And gee, why did that happen at exactly the time when we didn't really have a viable drug partner, in another country, right? These things don't happen by mistake. I mean, it seems to be. I mean, I don't understand the planning of it entirely, but there's a point at which conspiracy begins because coincidence is a little too ridiculous to assume.
Well, you basically pointed out earlier, history does kind of repeat itself, or at least kind of loops back on itself. But we defeated, the British used opium. I mean, they had the Opium Wars. Why would we not think that our own government, which is very much hooked into the City of London establishment, Vatican, Israel, the rest of the triad of power, why would we not think that they would use the same strategies on any enemy? And weren't we classified as domestic enemies in 1933 under the bankruptcy of the United States government?
See, there's a good point. And again, to constantly divide us amongst ourselves, to divide us against each other is definitely useful and a byproduct of a lot of this stuff as well. Because you know what? The more that we are fighting over nonsense like race and gender and, and really idiotic political beliefs. I mean, I'm going to invest in my blue shirt. I'm going to invest in my red shirt. Well, doesn't that sound just like gang violence, where you got, if you're wearing a red bandana in a blue neighborhood, you're going to get shot? Doesn't it sound like just the same kind of thing? Well, I'm going to root for my football team, which happens to be in my state, and if you root for yours, well, you suck. So let's drink some beer and get into a fist fight, and here we go. Meanwhile, it keeps you plenty well distracted with a whole bunch of, sort of artificial tribalism, and you forget that we're all human beings. And really, we're all subject to the same sorts of problems and the same reality. We're all having to breathe the same air. We're all having to share this little planet. And, doesn't that sound familiar as well, Randy?
Yeah, it does. And it's why I have gone into some of the dark stuff that I've gone into. Look, as I said earlier, I can't document everything that I believe. I'd like to. I'd like to be able to put all of it in black and white and sew it up in a nice bundle and ship it out to the people who would, I'm sure, gladly consume it, recognize its truth, and have their epiphany and ascend in about 3.2 seconds. But you and I both know that's not going to happen.
Well, a very smart man once said that, there is not enough proof for those who will doubt you, and there is no proof necessary for those who believe you sometimes. And that is just really the key here, is no matter how much documentation you pull up, no matter how many witnesses you find, no matter how many pieces of anecdotal evidence, physical stuff, there's always going to be somebody in the crowd who stands up and says, well, that's a fraud, that's a fake, and regardless of where it came from, no matter how many different, reputations you have for your evidence, it really doesn't matter at the end of the day. It's just a matter of what people choose to accept. And this is part of what I go through as well. I mean, sometimes I do this show and I try to explain certain things, and I sort of lead my guest, as you're probably starting to notice, down a couple of different paths, and I give you a couple of different options. I give you a crossroad, and then we just kind of see where it goes. And I appreciate doing it that way because it's much more organic. I don't like to plan this kind of thing. I mean, you and I have not actually exchanged a word until I brought you on here tonight.
That's right.
But you can see that, I'm sort of challenging you occasionally, but at the same time, I want to hear more about how it is you see things. Because no matter what, as we sit here, I guarantee you that the listener and myself can both always learn something. And I dare say that my listeners are probably learning a bunch of interesting things from you, because these are topics that I've only touched on briefly before. So I find this really, really fascinating. Listen, before we go any further, though, the name of your radio show, where they can find it, what else you're up to. I really want to know about the current you, and also, I didn't forget, I wanted to get some of your history, too.
Sure. I dodged that. The radio show is called Off Planet Radio. You can find all the information about that at offplanetradio.com. The shows are there. There's archives, there's a bio, there's contact information. It's pretty full frontal in terms of exposing everything that I do on an ongoing basis. And as for involvement with other things, obviously right now I'm involved with the Liberty Beacon Project, helping them to crank it up to another level, because I really believe in the vision that they put out in terms of creating this massive international sprawling website thing with, news coming out every day. I think it's a great thing that is going on with the Liberty Beacon. I highly encourage people to do that. And I am also involved in what's called the Free Energy Movement. I'm involved with a group out of Holland, which is working to promote free energy via conferences. They're called the Global Breakthrough Energy Movement, and I work with them doing media and communications.
Wow, I've done a couple of shows on free energy with Larry Wood. I don't know if you're aware of him.
Yeah, I know who Larry is, yeah.
Yeah, he's really a super intelligent guy, and I'm sure you've had him at least involved in some of your conversations. I don't know if on your radio show. I'm going to have to check out your radio show, though, because there may be a place where you and I might have to have an off-air discussion about something to see if you want to look into something that I don't know what to do with. So, and that's a hell of a statement for people to listen to me. I don't know what to do with certain things that I know, and actually, Randy may be the answer to that. And also, by the way, just for everybody, thelibertybeacon.com, all one word. You find plenty of articles. I'm sure Randy has been featured on there at some point. If not, he will be. And of course, the Falling Darkness, which I always mention, that I appreciate that one a little more because it's got a little more of an attitude problem.
Yeah.
And what can I say? I like the attitude problem. Of course, I like Roger's rants, which you can find on YouTube if you just look for the Liberty Beacon rants and all of that. But I'm telling you, I'm warming up to this whole thing with Randy here, and usually I do squash the alien thing, and the reason is that people start to mention stuff which has been propagated as disinformation. But you see, I'm hearing a serious discernment with you here, where you're not going to be suckered by all this, okay? Like the whole. Now here's where I tie back to the JFK thing. Everybody, be patient with me. I know you guys get angry when I keep bringing it up, but at one point there was this whole MJ7 and MJ12,
yes,
and all of this stuff, and really it's been pretty well debunked. Now. I'm going to tell you that the documents that were presented about this at the beginning are garbage. They really are. I would not rely on them at all. However, there is a lot that can be looked into regarding NASA, regarding the setup of the space agency, regarding what Kennedy was doing, his desire to begin to cooperate with the Soviets, which is now a documentable reality. It's not a conspiracy theory, by the way. And the reasons for that, and a lot of stuff that is still being held secret regarding NASA and Kennedy's interaction with them as well. He was doing battle with more than one government agency, ladies and gentlemen.
Oh my God, he was fighting the Hydra. You know, when you look back when the Kennedy assassination, you go, there aren't many people that really had much of an interest inside the government in seeing this guy live long at all.
No, absolutely not. And although people do make the mistake about the Federal Reserve and talking about those silver certificates, that's a misnomer. But what he was actually doing in battling the Federal Reserve is a hell of a deep rabbit hole.
Debunk that for me real quick, because I've heard that, I've believed that for a long time. I've seen the bills. Tell me about that.
Well, okay. A few things. The misnomer begins with people tell me that Kennedy was the first guy to issue constitutional money post, Abraham Lincoln. This is wrong. That particular type of note and that function of that note was all about the percentage of silver held in the banks, okay? And they were issued as early as the 30s. And continued to be issued, by the way. Everybody says, well, after he was assassinated, they went away. They were also, you can find them for yourself, still floating around in the money supply sometimes. Yeah. They were issued all the way up to 1971. Okay, so Kennedy's life and death have nothing to do with that. Now, the executive order, which is 11110, is actually an augmentation of a previous executive order,
right,
which in essence did not take away anything from the Federal Reserve. It was part of the executive branch's privilege and part of the president's privilege, particularly, to issue these notes and to regulate the percentage of them that were being printed. He turned around, in essence, and if you don't believe me, you can find G. Edward Griffin's work on this.
That's right.
Regarding, and the thing is, if you think, I don't proclaim to be an expert on the Federal Reserve, but I do say that G. Edward Griffin is. So when he says this, I take it very seriously. What's that?
The Creature from Jekyll Island.
Yeah, absolutely. The seminal book on the subject, which explains how it was founded. Okay? In addition to its function and its real purpose, can be easily gleaned from that book. But continuing on, he actually turned over his ability to control those issuing those United States notes as they were being issued to his Secretary of Treasury, which was C. Douglas Dillon at the time.
Right.
That was the effect of that executive order. It did not, proclaim that we're going to print constitutional money. And relatively speaking, if you look at the amount of those bills that were printed, I mean, according to, the Bureau of Minting and dear Lord, that particular name is
engraving. Yeah,
there you go. The engraving, and yeah, exactly. That bureau, according to them, if you take a look at the percentage of these silver certificates versus the Federal Reserve notes at that time, even if he had made a declaration and all that, it really would not have been a very effective tool to do anything. I mean, a drop in the bucket is just, you know, a minimal description for it. In addition, because of the repeal of the Silver Purchase Act and the alteration of the amount of silver which was actually being held in Federal Reserve banks at that time, there wasn't enough silver to support the certificate anymore. This is why it, of course, disappeared completely in '71, completely commensurate with Nixon's change about the gold standard finally eliminating the last standing pieces of that.
Yes.
And therefore, we went to a completely fiat currency where there was no backing whatsoever, but it was way past the assassination, and if the Federal Reserve had him whacked in order to deal with those bills, then they overreacted tremendously. So it's not a good motive, and if you actually look at it, although, and I used to believe it as well, because I really thought that that's what happened. It just seemed as though, you know, he started to make a stand regarding the money supply, and that's what got him killed. And that's a completely plausible reason, because I think if anybody really did grab a hold of that head of the Hydra very, very hard, I don't think they would live long. But Kennedy was only just in the very early stages of working on that. You can take a look at his interaction, and the name that I would tell you to Google for that is James Saxon. JFK and James Saxon. Take a look at that. And there was also a book called Battling Wall Street, which laid out a lot of this stuff a whole lot better than I can. And I can't remember the author's name. I'm very sorry. I remember his first name is Donald. I think it's Donald Gibson. Sorry. Wrote a book called Battling Wall Street, where he collates a whole lot of this stuff in Kennedy's interaction with the financial head of the Hydra. So that's where I'm at with that. And I say again that you know, again, if you don't believe me, take a look at I think G. Edward Griffin has an article on the internet called "The JFK Myth," I think is the title of it. But I bet you if you just sort of Google G. Edward Griffin and JFK, you'll find a much better explanation than I gave you. Likely, I mean, I haven't read that article in years, but it's certainly one of the things that I felt, you know, kind of confirmed what I believe regarding this. So, and I don't necessarily trust anybody, but if I figure something out for myself and G. Edward Griffin kind of agrees with me and it's got something to do with the Federal Reserve, it does increase my confidence.
Yeah. Well, you know, and I was never, to my mind, a strong aspect of the Kennedy assassination as well, because, as I said, there were so many other aspects behind it that, you know, many a few researchers over the years have brought out in an historical context that's documentable. But I was kind of vague on the details of that silver certificate and what happened there. Well,
I hope I cleared a few of them up for you.
Yeah, you did. And actually, you know, that's good from time to time to get some of your information cleaned up, because we tend to stick with old bugaboos that don't serve us very well as researchers.
Well, yeah, and you know, that's another good point. And I always like to say this. I really, really want to be wrong about a lot of this stuff.
Oh, my God.
Please, if you have the proof that will shut me down and say, listen, this is the reality of the situation, it would be a whole lot easier for me to believe that there was, you know, a lone gunman. It would be a whole lot easier for me to believe that, you know, that Ollie North was really the mastermind. It would be a whole lot easier for me to believe that 19 pissed off Muslims with box cutters actually pulled off a miracle one day. It would be a lot easier for me to believe, because, you know what, the world would be a little more random and a little less dangerous, and I would really appreciate that. But unfortunately, when you begin to examine the realities of the situations, you know, the history as it's laid out, and even the current events, which I do want to touch upon with you briefly, because, you know, we've talked a lot of history here. And I do find the MK Ultra thing, and I could probably have 3 shows with you just on MK Ultra and just listen to you talk about that, because I don't feel as though I've done enough research on it to really have a perfectly well-rounded view of it, although I do have my views on it. But I got to say that it is also interesting to see how you see the world. I mean, look, you definitely mentioned that you've been on a spiritual journey of sorts. I've been doing that and also been trying to explore that a bit with my listeners. But when you notice that symbology is being used like ISIS, and and you have a wholly new religious sect now being mentioned, because the Muslim boogeymen are not enough. There's actually another kind of sect of individuals in that part of the world who are worshiping a different god, not one of the ones that was born out of the Abraham narrative, so to speak, but is kind of on the other side of things. And the use of all these interesting acronyms for groups and their motives, etc., etc. I mean, it seems to me as though all war ends up being spiritual in some way or another, and ends up being religiously motivated, or at very least motivated by the dogma which has been, preset in populations, at the very least. And of course, we have the situation in Israel, and we have, did everybody forget about the Ukraine and the Russians and the whole? Oh my God, the panic attacks that some people were having in alternative circles, let's just say, about how World War III was going to kick off. We're in a lot of conflict. We're in a lot of trouble in the world. I mean, just from a geopolitical standpoint, not to mention all the troubles we're having at home with our own totalitarian kind of government. But your worldview would be interesting about, the current state of affairs also.
Well, now everything's moving very quickly because we're in this internet age. And we've seen the breakdown of what used to be called media, which was 3 networks, maybe 10 major newspapers in the country. The internet in some ways liberated us, but at the same time, it created something entirely different in the process. So now we have this constant proliferation of news that comes at us globally via all these satellite networks, the cable news networks, and just a multitude of news outlets on the internet that, are both, I would say, alternative and pseudo-alternative in terms of the data that they're presenting us. But you made an interesting point when you talked about ISIS earlier, and this goes into something that I do a lot of looking at, and here again, hard evidence. The term memes comes up a lot, because what I begin to notice is all of these weird, riffing kind of synchronistic things that happen. You talked about this, the aberrant religious structures that are emerging. One of the quotes that I've used for years on my website, and I don't think it's there right now because I just redid the website, is a quote from D.H. Lawrence. Those would maybe of another generation would remember him as the man portrayed as Lawrence of Arabia. He was a British playwright and novelist. But Lawrence has a quote that I love. It says, "The day of the absolute is over, and we're in for the strange gods once more." That's actually been my working motto. It's actually on my Skype. And I've been convinced of that for a decade, that what we were beginning to see was movement away from the established orders of things, because they're breaking down, and we're beginning to see a proliferation of very strange, very exotic expressions of violent spirituality in terms of what I call encultured terrorism, the creation of terrorist cells, terrorist groups, religious fanatic groups, going back again to our good friends at the CIA, who are very good at this, but even going back to the Nazis, when you begin to study it, the genesis of radical Islam actually goes back to the 1930s. And gosh, this is one I wish I had all my research laid out in front of me. There's a book out there. It's called The Mosque in Berlin, that details Hitler's interactions with radical Islamists back in the 1930s. So a long time ago.
Well, you know what's worthy, Randy, and I'm sorry to interrupt you, but what's worthy to mention here is that a lot of people do discount the, and I hate to use this term, but the occult kind of aspects to the Third Reich. There were many. There was practically a religion being formed there. It wasn't simply a political movement and easily boiled down to hate speech and we are the greatest people, our humans are better than your humans kind of mentality. It wasn't that simple. There was a lot of sort of esoteric influence over the actions of the Third Reich that I think a lot of people do ignore.
Oh, yeah. No, well, and some of it was kind of hinted at in Raiders of the Lost Ark. I mean, that kind of gave you kind of a light spin on the idea that, they were looking for something to juice themselves up supernaturally.
Well, yeah, vaguely they were involved, just vaguely, they were involved in seeking all sorts of iconic artifacts. This was there was a group of individuals which were charged with doing precisely that. I'm trying to think of the one that I actually took some time to study maybe 10 years ago about the spear.
The spear of Longinus.
There we go. That exactly. That was a really fascinating thing. And then they ended up with actually a couple of different iconic spears, which held very serious. I don't know how to put this, but they were very significant to certain religious sects. They wanted to control a great many artifacts, and this wasn't just a matter of Christianity or a matter of, satanic beliefs or demonology in one way or another. They wanted all of it. They were really seeking a wide span of stuff, and there's a great deal into the organization. Even the selection of the swastika was not by mistake.
It's an ancient Hindu symbol, goes back thousands of years.
Absolutely. So even the crooked cross itself is not there just because it looks like a powerful symmetrical symbol. There are aspects of the esoteric throughout the entire sort of story arc of the rise and fall of the Third Reich.
Right. If you go back and you study the Tool Society, you're going to find out the overtones there were of the occult in Nazism, and certainly at the top of Hitler's cadre of commanders.
Well, yeah, precisely. There was even a sort of shrine being erected, and I'm not sure exactly what happened to it, but there was kind of a Nazi shrine being erected to bring together all of these sort of aspects in one place. And there was actually, again, a weird sort of spiritualism to it that, again, like I said, is just really ignored. So, I really dare people to go look into that, because it's not as simple as just, well, they hated Jews and they thought, German people were supermen. It wasn't that simple, ladies and gentlemen. It just wasn't. There was a whole really bizarre sort of ideal behind a lot of this stuff.
So now we have, ISIS emerging, and it's a fairly, I guess, new variant of Islam. It seemed to me initially like it was designed to pull us back into Iraq, and at the same time, it also seems as though it's more far-reaching. There's an agenda going on here. There have been on the internet a profusion of threats that ISIS will bring its wrath to the United States. I take that as a threat echoed probably through the information pipeline of the intelligence agencies, who will use this now to begin to frame future false flag events. And then you have this beheading of this journalist, which is, I'm nominating this for my favorite fake news story of the month, because I really am not compelled to believe this story at all. And
looking at that film, just from an honest sort of objective perspective. Let's be honest. I've seen many an amateur webisode that had better special effects. I'm starting to believe that this is a complete fabrication, and I'm not somebody who usually goes for the fabrication angle on this stuff. But listen, if you're going to rub it in my face, I got no point. I have no recourse other than to call it out as a fake. I'm sorry. There's a lot of elements to it, and I don't want to break it down right here because I don't want to waste time on it. But I mean,
oh my gosh, no, because you see what this is in the end. And I've done this, it is a rabbit hole on one level. If you're going to debunk something, you trust your gut. You look at the facts. You go, does this make sense? Does this hold up under scrutiny? And then you begin to look at the backdrop of it a little bit. And now it's coming out that, again, they did these interviews, the major media with the family, and then one of the crisis actors shows up as playing the sister. And these people don't look emotionally distraught to be grieving siblings of a man who just had his head chopped off.
See, but in fairness, I'll say this, that when it comes to that kind of stuff, that's arguable. Because the reaction of a human being, you could be in shock, for instance. That's an easy kind of explanation. And meanwhile, understand, I think this whole thing has been staged. But to go after it based on that, for me, is a little bit thin, only because there are various ways that somebody could react to someone's death. They could be holding it together. I mean, I could talk someday about my psychological conditioning, but I know for a fact that there are some points at which I can shut down, and I do it purposely in order to cope with things myself.
My point was to point out that at this point, I just said point 3 times. That can't be good. We were talking about the spear of Longinus. Synchronicities, I'm a meme person, but here's the thing. I did extensive amounts of dissection of events such as the 2007 Virginia Tech shooter, the shooting in Colorado, the Batman shooter. I thoroughly researched and investigated the Sandy Hook thing. And interestingly enough, I found things with the Sandy Hook thing that scared me, that I didn't want to believe. I found out the nexus of crisis actors, who they are, who financed them, where they're located, who is behind them, and what they're really doing. And then I proceeded to use footage from ABC News to locate the crisis actress who was playing the grieving school teacher that was interviewed by Diane Sawyer on primetime television. So I became satisfied at some point after I had run this. I vet my information through a number of people that I trust, other bloggers, other researchers, and we became convinced that these false flag events leading up to the Sandy Hook, which was the last event that I actually did go ahead and do an extensive amount of forensic research on, I became convinced that, to my horror, our powers that be are actually scripting events now to drive the public sentiment towards predetermined outcomes, using perceptions of violent events as a means to, well, this basically is psychic driving, isn't it? I mean, that's what they're doing.
Well, yeah, we have repetition of events, and just briefly, and again, I don't want to get into a quagmire, but the thing is, I don't fall on the side of believing that Sandy Hook was entirely fabricated. However, there are a lot of strange anomalies there, and something is wrong with the picture again. And it definitely, one thing that, no matter which direction you come from regarding that situation, you have to admit, pretty much as someone who is thinking, as someone who is examining, as someone who is researching the situation, is this, that it has definitely been seized upon as a mechanism for creating a mood, for creating a narrative, for pushing an agenda. This is certainly true, regardless of how much you think it was, partially fabricated, completely fabricated, or was just a real situation that has been, misrepresented and twisted in the mainstream media. It doesn't matter to me, because at the end of the day, it has been utilized for so many different really nefarious purposes, not the least of which, in my opinion, is to encourage the need for disarmament among our population. So that's how I see that event. I just want you to know that. But
and I understand that, and I understand that there's a lot of sensitivities about what really happened at Sandy Hook or what happened in the movie theater in Colorado, because those events are highly cordoned off after the fact, and we don't really know. But leaving room for speculation, there are also a number of facts in every given case where things simply do not line up. And with Sandy Hook, they're just myriad of things that do not make sense. They just continue to present themselves. So the question becomes this. Did 3,000 people die at the World Trade Center on September 11th? I have to believe that they did. I have to believe that the people that died over Pennsylvania in that plane that came down were also victims of 9/11 as well, plus any, the loss of whatever property and life occurred in D.C. at the Pentagon.
Well, and the firefighters, the people on the ground, there was definitely loss of life. This is not fiction. And, and I don't have a body count. But having been in that area at that time, I got to tell you that there were real families who lost real people.
Yeah.
This is a reality, and these weren't crisis actors. These were people that just were there out of happenstance. They just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time, and there was a bunch of them. Personally, I even had a stepfather at that time whose health completely deteriorated, and he wound up dying within weeks of the event. Because he had been someone who worked in that building, in one of the buildings that he watched collapse on television. Okay, there was a whole lot going on there, and there was a serious loss of life. I mean, there are people out there, and this is where I say that there is such a thing as kooky kind of conspiracy theory, and I know that sounds kind of crazy coming out of my mouth, but what's ridiculous is ridiculous, and I find it just as ridiculous to say that 19 guys with box cutters pulled this off all by themselves. It is just as ridiculous to say that nobody died and it's all a hologram. Okay, well, I'm sorry, I don't see it that way.
That in this war that's going on constantly, truth is the first casualty of war, and unfortunately,
well said,
we are left to sift through facts that sometimes are planted, that are sometimes manufactured, and some of which are just the inconvenient horrors of the events that have been playing out. And there is none larger than 9/11. Because from my perspective, Charles, these events are planned, they are scripted. There is an aspect to them that cannot be controlled. When you're talking about bringing down 3 major buildings in New York City, when you're talking about crashing something, whether it was actually a plane, I doubt it, or a missile into the Pentagon, and whatever that inconvenient thing was that happened out in western Pennsylvania with the rogue airliner, we have elements to this that can't be contained, but the overall effect is still the same at the end of the day. It is a mass trauma event. It is designed to do to the public exactly the same thing that the Nazi paperclip scientists and American scientists tried to do with people who were in MK Ultra projects back in the 60s and the 70s. Split the public conscience to a place where it is in constant turmoil and cognitive dissonance and believes everything and yet really believes nothing anymore.
Right, and creating, fear-based points of rally, and I do mean that. This is exactly what they did, and I have admitted this on my own show that at that time I was guilty of it. I was one of those people that, as those events were unfolding,
And as the reality of the situation was starting to set in, if you would have asked me back then what I think should be done, what should be the response, especially within days, months, and probably even in the first, year or so of that event, I would have said to you that what we need to do is absolutely wipe the people who did this to us off of the planet. This is the response that needs to happen, and this was the response they wanted to elicit from certain members of the population, those that they could not paralyze with fear, in my opinion. So they wanted to give you either a rallying point, either you could stand up and you could fight the boogeyman that we've given you, or you could be so afraid now you'll just simply do as you're told. And this is what I learned over time. But my initial reaction to it worked on me.
Well, because its parallel would be the bombing of Pearl Harbor or the burning of the Reichstag in Nazi Germany. It became a focal point that then could be emotionally directed. People would again be willing to send their sons and now daughters, I cringe at that, off to war. They would be willing to make these sacrifices as they're always made. It gave the government an opportunity to finish trashing the economy after the late 1990s, when we actually had a high point in the economy. Then in 2000, Mr. Bush comes in, and we have this event, and then we begin the extraction of more value out of the economy itself under the rubric of war again.
Yeah, the looting of the American economy was absolutely acceptable to the population, because, after all, we needed to defend ourselves against all of these enemies that we will never know where they're coming from. They're no longer, simply the state-driven, dogmatic, strongman leaders that are threatening us from afar. It's not that. Now they've actually hit us. So it's time to get behind it. And while you're at it, just remember that we need to be able to give you proctology exams if we need to in order to check on you, because, your freedom, your personal privacy and all of that is worthless if you're dead, because that's what's going to happen unless we are able to know everything. And therefore, open up wide, we're coming inside, NDAA, Patriot Act 1 and 2, on and on and on. Acceptable legislation that just got by most of the populace without even a whimper of, a protest. And, gee, isn't that interesting? It was the same type of thing that was utilized, as you said, during other wars. I point to Vietnam all the time.
Yeah, Tonkin, yep.
Gulf of Tonkin incident. There was no Gulf of Tonkin incident.
No.
And they even admit that now, that the entire, like I say all the time, 58,000 at a minimum American soldiers did not make it home. At least 1 million men were dropped back on these shores, damaged beyond belief. And that doesn't resonate in your society. Well, look, if you don't really care about people over there, let's remember this too. The estimates for Vietnamese casualties go from 1 million to 4 million, depending on who you're listening to. And wow, isn't that fairly significant? Or are these just numbers? No, they're human beings.
That's right. But here again, what is the difference between war and genocide? And in the case of Vietnam, it was perfectly okay. We dehumanized them, just like we did the Japanese in World War II. We called these people gooks and slitheads, and we said it was okay because they were subhuman. They were communist-loving American haters who had to be wiped out, when in fact the only thing that needed to be wiped out was the obstacles for business interests who wanted to exploit that particular region of Southeast Asia at the time.
Right, and in reality, we supported the Catholic regime to go and march down into an area where they did not belong.
Thank you for that.
To take over against people that were Buddhists, essentially, and did not want to have.
This is a perfect storm. They're yellow. They're Buddhist. They're non-Christian. They're non-technological. And they're commie lovers. And, of course, we were all trained to know that the Red Chinese were such a threat to us, even though a few years later they wind up being our business partners. Gosh, that's real inconvenient.
They still are. They still are. And if you don't believe me, just go into the local Walmart and, Okay. Witness how many Chinese slave goods are actually on their shelves. I don't like going into the Wally Mart myself.
Oh.
But, but do take a trip in there and just, take a sample. Pick an aisle. Okay? You can't escape this kind of stuff. I mean, and of course, let's not forget about the Golden Triangle, because after all, they needed a mechanism by which they could begin to allow, the heroin shipments out of there. And lo and behold, the streets of America were all of a sudden inundated, especially in the inner cities, with a heroin epidemic. Gee, that's coincidence again, isn't it?
It's a revisitation of the Opium Wars. It's old strategies, old British war strategies, old, dare I use the term, Zionist war strategies. We're just now seeing everything being folded in at once. And I look at the news, and I talk to some of my friends. I'll talk to Roger Landry, or I'll talk to my friend Leslie or somebody. And we're all pretty much agreed that there is almost a sense of desperation in the air right now, that they've got to light something up, because people like us, Charles, are actually on one level or another kind of succeeding. I know it doesn't feel like it, but I see a movement that has now enough current going that if we amp it up, we can wake up some people, and we can change the way this thing is arcing right now.
Yeah, well, you're probably are you referring to Leslie Carabosa?
No, I'm actually talking about a friend of mine who's also on Liberty Beacon. No.
Leslie is part of the Liberty Beacon as well. And I know we touched upon this at one point during an interview, but of course we got more into the natural woman kind of discussion briefly with Leslie. But we did touch on this where look, they couldn't sell us the Al-Qaeda simply Muslim, loose confederation or cabal of individuals that have the simple Muslim extremism. They had to give us this new boogeyman, which, again, we financed just like we did Al-Qaeda by supporting the Mujahideen and all that kind of good stuff. And, everybody who listens to my show is probably well aware of that. But, ISIS, IS, ISIL, whatever it is you want to call them, the anachronism, which oddly enough doesn't quite fit if you say it in Arabic, does it? The interesting narrative,
It's a very interesting Americanized acronym. As usual, it probably came out of the Rand Corporation. They're very, very good at brewing this stuff up.
Or the Brookings Institute or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and of course, like I say, if one boogeyman doesn't work, well, we've got 4 more we can probably fabricate for you real quick, and we'll do them just about the same way. And this combines, though, because, you can find legitimate people who are angry at the American empire in various parts of the globe for good reason. Mm-hmm. Listen, I've tried to point this out to people that think that this is the new threat on the horizon that we need to stamp out and all that. The more, Rush Limbaugh type listener people. I occasionally get locked in these discussions, and I don't know why I waste my time, but, it's probably because I'm hoping that I'll give them that half a second of clarity, where they'll stop looking through that lens just for a moment long enough to observe the world around them. They think it's the biggest threat and everything else, and I say, isn't it funny that we seem to support the biggest threat before we go after it? We build it up to take it down, and doesn't that sound like a very simple technique that they refer to as a straw man, except we're using whole countries as straw men? Isn't that kind of what's happening here?
Yeah, well, it's all fictitious entities. I mean, unfortunately, first off, one of the things that we have to attack is the concept right now that what is represented to us as the so-called American government actually represents the people of this country, because it does not. This government is a corporate entity. It has been through a series of hostile takeovers, reorganized, looted, pilfered, and used as what you just called perfectly a straw man to create this global war system, this idea of perpetual war on all states to eventually grind people down to the place where they can get to their one world order. And, I don't even like that theory. I hated that theory. I heard that theory from fundamentalist Christians for years, and I'm like, you people were lunatics. But there's truth to it. And there's truth to the fact that this country was basically taken over and conquered from inside by interests outside of the country, and there's multiple factions, and that in fact we are the mechanism which would ultimately lead to this gigantic global meltdown. We're sitting inside the belly of the beast right now, and there's no easy way to deal with those facts.
And it's absolutely no accident that the race pimping is now occurring domestically, that we're not trying to somewhat pander to even guys like you and me at this point by saying that, oh, well, we need to have an examination of all of this military equipment being given to our local police. We should really take a good look at that, because it may not be the right amount of training or something. I don't know what it is, but something is maybe wrong here with, armored personnel carriers being in your local police forces, arsenals. Maybe we shouldn't be giving them military equipment. Maybe we should train them better. Maybe we should do something. That'll probably be, at the end of the day, the answer. More training and more integration with the federal government, with the military, the military-style policing, which has nothing to do with protecting and serving a community, right? And, while we're at it, we can always recall the old racial issues. We can, ramp up a few more gender issues and keep you all distracted and at least partially thinking about it being at each other's throats, because this way, you don't pay attention to the magician's hands when the assistant takes off her jacket. You know what I'm saying? This is what it comes down to. It's a sleight of hand trick. And it's really, really revolting. And I'm so glad that, that the Liberty Beacon and individuals like yourself are out there really examining these things just like I do, just like many other people are doing. I think we're growing in number, and we are starting to push the conversation in just some of the smallest ways. I think that they've had to change some of their MO in order to force feed this to the majority of the population. And we're down to the last little bit here. Believe it or not, 2 hours has almost gone by here, Randy. So I don't know if there's any key points that you want to make sure you hit on, but now would be the time, because at some point here very soon, my obnoxious bumper is going to kick in, and it'll be all over. But, for feedback on this show, if anybody wants to write to me email-wise, I was told that I don't bring up the email address enough. It is Chuck, CHUCK 1972 at Lycos. Yeah, it's an old email address. LYCOS.com.
Lycos, that's awesome, man. I love Lycos.
I've had that sucker since the late 90s.
I was going to say.
Yeah. And it is definitely the address I use. And also, I do take Skype messages. If somebody wants to drop in and try and, squeeze in a couple of minute phone call here, I will take calls. 718-717-8296. And I pretty much feel as though that if you throw anything at Randy here, he'll have something to say. Of course, be reasonable, respectful. I'll add you right in. No screening, no nothing. Just come right on. All right.
Yeah, that's how I roll, too. And I almost always forget to invite people to call in when I'm doing live shows. So,
yeah, I forgot up to this point, believe it or not, because I'm just so enthralled in the conversation, which is what I try and do most of the time on my show, is have a really good conversation, because it's so much easier to listen to a dialogue, in my opinion, than some people's monologues. Although some people are very skilled with their monologues, I got to say, but I guess I'm not so great at that, so I'm better with the dialogue.
Oh, my
Anyway, key points from you, sir, just in case we don't get interrupted by a phone caller. Please go right ahead. The floor is yours.
Okay. Just one more time, if you want to know anything or find me or contact me, just go to offplanetradio.com. There's all the things there that you need to contact and connect with and hear the shows and go back and see if what I'm saying and what I'm talking about is true. Where I like to leave things anytime I do one of these is because we get into a lot of facts, we get into a lot of historical data, we get into a lot of the really visceral stuff that's like in your face, and I love that. But ultimately, you know, I am going at this from a spiritual standpoint and not from a religious standpoint. People who know me, and there's many of them out there, and some of them really don't like me a whole lot at this point. I was a real religious guy, and I did religious programming on Christian radio, and I was a minister at one point, and I broke out of all of that stuff for a reason, because the spirituality was not being served by the mechanisms. Nevertheless, the takeaway is that we are in a spiritual war. The division of humans on this planet right now is off scale. I've never seen so much division, so much rancor between human beings, and so much division on party lines and of things that shouldn't matter. We're one race, and we do face a threat from outside, both outside of this world and inside of it, a cabal of evil. And we need to begin talking to each other, and we need to begin respecting each other. And we need to get to information sources like thelibertybeacon.com, where you can begin to connect with information that's going to make a difference in your consciousness. And that's probably the most important thing that I can ever say to people, is put down your arms against each other and begin to look at each other as co-workers in the liberation of planet Earth.
Right, and you know, the thing for me is that you know, regardless of whether each of us sings, you know, in a slightly different key, if you put the chorus together, we will cover the spectrum, and we can be the singular voice of humanity if we all stand up and we all act in some way or other. And shifting the consciousness is the most important thing. I always call it the psychosocial effect of what it is that we're trying to do, spending our time. You know, speaking to you, the listeners, speaking to the public in general about these things, trying to provoke thought, trying to provoke the individual to be as they were intended. You know, a creature who is an individual, a creature who decides their own destiny, who is allowed to live their own life and to be free. This is absolutely what I'm all about, and this is why I've been exploring spirituality on shows recently. In some cases, it's been negatively received, but you know what? It's all right. And I do not and have not counted myself as a Christian, but either way, I can't argue with a single thing you just said. And you know, and regardless of where your spiritual evolution has taken you, I will be more than happy to interact with you again, sir. I want you to know that.
Oh, thanks.
And I really appreciate your time tonight. I want to thank you for coming on. And, of course, if you're catching this later on downstream, please go to ucy.tv and check out the /TOE page. You'll see a chat room there which runs along with all of the shows. I'm sure there's more than 40 hosts on here now, live shows, pre-recorded stuff, everything you can imagine. And I don't necessarily endorse everything on the network, but I do always endorse people's free speech, and we do have some of the best and most interesting people available out in the stream, just like the Liberty Beacon has now pulled together, has cobbled together some of the most interesting and enlightened individuals possible, which is why I absolutely dedicate every Tuesday to the Liberty Beacon. And sad that Roger wasn't here this week, but I got to tell you, it was kind of good because I got 2 hours with you, Randy.
So, yeah, that was awesome. You're a great host, by the way. I really, really enjoy the fact that you're willing to subject questions the way you did, and the way you're willing to entertain ideas that probably are a little alien to you.
Very good. That was excellent. I love that right there. Yeah. And you know what? We may actually have to do a show on the whole alien thing, because I have been criticized for dismissing a lot of it. But look, I try and sift through things as best I can, and maybe I am a little more skeptical about these kinds of things. But don't think for a moment that I don't believe that there is many otherworldly things that we do not collectively fully understand at this point, and I would like to. So let's get to it, and let's learn together with all of these broadcasts, okay? And, you know, what else can I say, right? I'm trying to learn right along with the audience.
But that's what we're all doing, you know. I mean, and like I said, anybody that's followed me, and there are a few, not many, over the last 10 years, have watched how I've shifted and changed and moved and gone back and said, I don't think I got that right. And, oh, by the way, this has popped up on my radar. See, that's the cool thing about this. We get to, like, be totally transparent in public with our own private journey and trip on stuff.
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, and it is an evolution. It is an evolution. And some people don't like the use of that word, but what else can you call it when you are rising up from the shackles, the psychological, the spiritual shackles, in fact? Because you know what? When they have control of your mind, your spirit does walk with it. And no matter how you view the human soul, no matter how you view life in general, I'm one of these people who believes that everything that is alive is connected to everything else that is alive, and that life is a perpetual cycle, just like we see in the physical realm. There is that reality as well, which dictates a great deal of what goes on. So this is the point, and this is why sometimes I seize upon these sort of esoteric topics and have enjoyed spending time on it. And the reason is I am trying to just give you something else to consider. Never, and to borrow from Kevin Blanch, who's another host on this network, don't remain in your dogma snuggie, because guess what? It doesn't let the rest of the world in, okay? And, that's all there is to it. The Snuggie is a product of, corporate America dishing out its garbage to you. They put a blanket with some sleeves on it, and you can get nice and comfortable and protect yourself from the air if you like. But at the end of the day, doesn't it make you a little bit less of a person if that's the only place that you're going to remain? And at least consider some of the things that are brought to you guys objectively. And even if you think it's completely backwards, evil, crazy, whatever else, at the very least, you've now learned what is backwards, evil, and crazy. So no matter how you take it, I'm happy to try and do this. And again, Randy, I really appreciate it. And one last time, what is the name of your radio show again?
Off Planet Radio.
Off Planet Radio. Got to tell you, I admire some other people's names. I'm not very creative with it. That's why it's called the Ochelli Effect, because it's just my last name. And do me one little favor next time we talk. Call me Chuck, because I'd like to call you my friend, and my friends call me Chuck.
Absolutely. We're friends, we're brothers, and I think we cemented something interesting tonight. One last thing, by the way, can I say props to our good friend Terry Joyce out there, who, frankly, set this whole thing up tonight. So she's kind of like the executive producer of this.
Absolutely. Terry Joyce is and you know what? Thank you. I need reminders to let people know stuff. Terry Joyce, who's been on my show many times, is actually the person who is setting me up with a lot of the great people. I mean, Roger I've talked to myself anyway, but a lot of the great people making me aware of individuals in the Liberty Beacon. I hate to say project, but in the Liberty Beacon, the hell with it. It's one word, one word altogether, thelibertybeacon.com.
For the anti-MK Ultra.
And yes, and believe that, no matter where his positions are on anything else, Sandy Hook onto the alien agenda. I guarantee you we are all anti-MK Ultra, because at the end of the day, none of us wants to be controlled. So, regardless of whatever their nefarious or other purposes may be, it doesn't matter. Freedom is not just a choice, it's a responsibility, and it is the natural state of man, regardless of where you think man came from. So, let us never forget that. And yes, thank you, Terry. Absolutely wonderful. I'm so glad that you gave me Randy, and everybody else who's come on the Liberty Beacon over the past few months. The Liberty Beacon night on Tuesdays here on the Ochelli Effect. I got to say, it's been really great, especially since Terry took over doing this, because she has given me a very dynamic and well thought out group of individuals, regardless of whatever busyness she has going on in her own life. And we'll probably hear from Terry again on this show pretty soon. because I like talking to her because she at least has a very good sense of humor. As we all know, she's a stand-up comedian. And check out Freedom of Joyce, by the way, which is the name of her show and her blog and everything else. If you don't just happen to go through the Liberty Beacon and find her that way. Absolutely wonderful stuff. I really appreciated her article on the police state and all that, which I think was one of the very first things I discussed with her on the air here. And she's just a really, really cool part of the Liberty Beacon. So, yes, thank you for reminding me to mention her as well. And also, guys, if for future shows, if you want to add yourself to my Skype list, it's charles.ochelli. That is my ID, and I will add anybody, but I don't promise you that I'll keep you on. Messages that come through, sometimes I read them, sometimes I don't, but you can easily jump in and call in if you're on my list. So that makes it even easier, and you don't even have to use the 718 number. And that is just about the end of our time. And I'm actually a little ahead of myself because I did finally reset my clock. Thank you for listening.
Webcam microphone up close.
At the age of 19 in 1962, she was a... But I have the files. I read this stuff at the National Archives, and I read these other things. I said to myself, how can that be possible? The brain, pistols and fondle slab of choice. I don't know what computers doesn't really matter. Internet, professional wrestlers, and not Jesse Ventura style. It doesn't matter where the cartoon comes from as long as it's real. It doesn't. It's hard to get real these days, because seriously, they want you